I'm Dr. Jeffrey Overall. I'm an associate professor of entrepreneurship and strategy at Ontario Tech University, and I'm a co-founder of the Global Institute for Conscious Economics.
And I am Rhiannon Rosalind. I'm the president and CEO of the Economic Club of Canada and the co-founder of the Global Institute for Conscious Economics. And we are on the show today to talk about how expanding your consciousness can actually solve economic and business problems. Stay tuned. We hope to hear you.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron, and the founder of Full Monty Leadership. I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. To find out more, you can simply go to FullMontyLeadership.com. So let me ask you, in what ways do you need to up-level your leadership? Well, here's a really interesting question for you. What if you were instantly transformed into, I don't know, say a Buddha? How would you reassess your relationship with capital? Well, we're going to find out soon. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just simply look for Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please go over there out to wherever you tune in and do us a favor. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show. You can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday. You can also look for us on Roku TV, where there's over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. You can also catch us on Google Home or Alexa by simply saying play Dov Baron podcast. Again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. At the 2020 World Economic Forum in Davos, Billionaire Salesforce CEO Marc Benioff said, "Capitalism as we know it is dead. And it is time for a new form of capitalism that focuses more on societal good." Well, if the Buddha or Jesus came back today, would they condemn capitalism? Or would they look at capitalism as a way to do good? Well, we're going to find out in this particular episode, because our guests today are Rhiannon Rosalind and Dr. Jeffrey Overall. They are the founders of the Global Institute for Conscious Economics. Their resumes are very impressive. Rhiannon is the president, CEO, and owner of the Economic Club of Canada. She's the founder and of the Junior Economic Club of Canada. She's also the CEO and co-founder of the Global Institute for Conscious Economics. Rhiannon is challenging the corporate world to see its role in creating more prosperous and equal future for everyone. She has hosted countless thought leaders and change makers at the Economic Club of Canada through the years, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, former First Lady Michelle Obama, human rights advocate Amal Clooney, and even some guy, what was his name now? Barry, no, come to me a minute. Maybe, Barack Obama, that guy too. She has also been named as Canada's change agents by Canada's Business Magazine on the WXN Canada's top 100 powerful leaders, women in business 3 times, and she became the youngest ever into the Hall of Fame award and winner in the fall of 2018. And then there's Dr. Jeffrey Overall. He joined the Faculty of Business Information Technology in Ontario Tech University in 2018. Prior to that, he'd held professorship positions in the entrepreneurial and strategy departments of a university in University Ryerson. I have no idea how to pronounce that. I think it's Nipissing, but we'll get to that. University and Leibniz Universität in Hanover, which is, I'm sure, Germany. He's also taught in St. Petersburg Polytechnic University in Russia and the University of Bradford School of Management in Britain. He is the co-founder of Global Institute of Conscious Economics with Rhiannon. He is the co-founder of 2 nonprofit organizations that provided impoverished children in rural Nepal with education subsidies for, and has over 8 years of management experience within the international B2B context, specifically as the value chain manager for a startup with automotive industry. In his portion, he was responsible for the supply chain, including manufacturing facilities, even in the Far East of Asia. Together, they are the authors of soon to be released Capitalist Buddha, Waking Up to Conscious Economics. So ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and help me welcome Dr. Jeffrey Overall and Rhiannon Rosalind. Jesus, guys, that is one hell of a resume. How the hell am I supposed to do that?
I don't even know how you said that all.
And then you've got things like University and Ding Bong. What, Jeff? Why do you say those?
Nipissing University, and if my German serves me correctly, it's Leibniz Universität of Hanover.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. So thank you for the education in how to say those things. I highly suggest that for future shows with any other host, you send them the phonetic spelling of those things, because those are you got some serious resume, you two. Thank you. I really appreciate you both being here. It is really awesome to have you here. So
thank you.
I'm really inspired by what you're doing. For those of you who don't know, we had both of these guys as guests on Curiosity Bites. And if you've not heard this particular episode of Curiosity Bites, it's because of one of 2 reasons. It's either not been released yet, which is entirely possible as we record this, or you've not heard it yet. So simply get over to wherever you tune into podcasts, look for the Curiosity Bites episode with these 2. It's a fascinating conversation, which we go into other areas that besides what we're going to go into today. So if you find this particular show fascinating, I promise you'll find that one too. So let's sort of dive in here. One of the places I'd like to start is with asking who has been a major influence on you. And when I say that, oftentimes people want to come up with, people like Nelson Mandela or somebody famous. But the question actually is about who's had a major influence on you and the way you conduct yourself as a leader, who is somebody that we might not suspect or may not even know. It could be your Aunt Sally. We certainly don't know that person. So who's somebody who's had a major influence on both of you, each of you?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I could obviously take it right to my family and say that my grandmother was really a huge inspiration to me growing up, just watching her as a woman and the way that she conducted herself and moved through the world and raised 5 children and raised me as well and worked. And just at the time, when she was, when she was alive, women were in a very different position than what we are right now. And my grandmother actually took the slow boat to China, left 5 children at home to go meet my grandfather over in Beijing. I think it's just fascinating the things that she did and the risks that she took as a woman in that time when that was unheard of for a woman, to leave her children, to travel the world like that. It was just so special. So I think I got some of my spirit spunk and, just taste for travel and taste for seeing the world and understanding the world from her. But also, I hate to kind of go back there. We're really influenced by people like John Lennon. We're really influenced by Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, people who challenged the status quo, people who stood up for something different than what the collective was comfortable with at the time. And I think that when we go back to those historic people, we can pull on an energy that we really fuel ourselves with today. So I hate to be, typical, but these people really do influence the way that we do our work.
But for me, even in saying that, what you just said was very aligned, because, your grandmother was certainly breaking the status quo. She was doing something that was not socially acceptable. I mean, you know, when your grandmother was a young lady getting on a slow boat to China to go meet her prospective husband, and she's already got kids. Like,
well,
so she's,
it was her children with my grandfather, but my grandfather was traveling.
yeah, but she's got those kids.
Yeah, exactly.
So as I'm saying, she's got the kids, they're there, and she's going to go meet her husband on the slow boat to China. Number one, you don't leave your kids. Number two, you sure as hell don't go to a foreign land, where Whitey is really be an unusual sight back in those days.
Yes.
Pretty amazing. And, you know, and so it really aligns with the people you're talking about, because everybody you spoke about is somebody who challenged the status quo. That's cool. Very cool.
Rule breakers.
Rule breakers, yeah. What about you, Jeff?
Yeah, I think, you know, going back to the upbringing is, you know, I, at a very young age, my father was a businessman, so he would talk a lot around the table about leadership and things like that. And what I learned from him was to be willing to capitalize on opportunities, and sometimes the most difficult decisions are sometimes the best ones to make. And in, you know, between the 1980s and 1990s, growing up in Montreal, Quebec, as an English-speaking family during that referendum period, there's some difficult times that English-speaking people experienced. My dad being one of those at work, and he, you know, made the difficult decision. There was some people that were doing it, and a lot of people that weren't. And he moved us, you know, left his job and moved us to Ontario, and making that decision, uprooting his family and saying, you know, this is an opportunity and maybe we only really have one shot at it and we should probably do it now. And, you know, taking that leap of faith and, you know, working with entrepreneurs and being one myself, I find that it's often very difficult for people to take that idea in the mind and actually implement it and go past that risk point and throw yourself out there and hope for the best and hope for something to come, that you took that step and you took that risk. So, you know, having that as a foundation and then looking towards other people as we embark further on our journey, talking about, you know, difficult things that we're doing and some of the work that we're developing around, you know, future of work and giving young people a voice. And this is in many ways talking that is ahead of the time, and it is difficult for some people to hear. So when you're having those conversations and you're experiencing that static from other people, you look to people that have done, you know, not to say that we're to the caliber of people like Harriet Tubman and John Lennon and Rosa Parks, but you can take the battles that they fought and the paths that they cleared, and you can learn lessons from them and embody that and use that where you're going. If you're in uncharted territory and you haven't been there yourself, or you have no one that's close to you that's pushed that envelope or done that, then you just have to take a look back at history and see who's been there and what you can learn from them. And that's, you know, what we're doing, you know, right now.
Yeah, and I definitely see that. And it's an interesting thing for me, because you brought up something that I find particularly fascinating, and that is what I call invisible biases. So invisible biases, we all have them. Every human being has them, and we have to self-examine them to discover them. But, you know, in a generalized, at a cultural level, they often exist with white people. And what I mean by that is that we have a cultural bias against people who are not white. And at the same time, we have to examine that and pull that down. But at the same time, it's not impossible for a cultural bias to fall upon a white person. So, you know, if we look at Dr. Jeffrey over here, and we go, okay, well, you know, you're a whitey, right? Whitey who grew up privileged is probably, you never suffered any of that. But to grow up in Quebec, which at the time, which people don't understand, was in many ways a separate country from Canada, not legally, but culturally, a completely different culture. And they, by the way, in case you don't know, they, not talking to you two, of course, but to everybody else, Quebec has completely different laws than the rest of Canada, and it was more evident then than ever. And if you were an English-speaking person in Quebec at a time, there was a lot of prejudice. So I really like that you're bringing this to the fore, because And for me, it's a great way for us to understand what you're doing with your work today as you both come together. And, and I know from our previous conversation that Rhiannon, you face cultural bias because of how you grew up and what you grew up in, and where you were educated, and how all those things were saying, well, you can't be this, which is what we all face as leaders. And as leaders, we have to, in many ways, burn that path forward. We have to become dragons who breathe fire onto that path and break it open. Just because we might not be Black or Asian or whatever it might be, or gay or whatever it is, doesn't mean we're not constantly battling a bias. And I love that you two are bringing that to the fore in the level of economics.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that foundationally, all of us, our perceptions of the world and our perceptions of the systems that operate our world are heavily influenced by the lens in which we have grown up and what we've seen and what we've experienced. And so I think for both Jeff and myself, we both have a unique lens that we look through. It's not what would traditionally be expected when you look at us, for sure. And especially now with these resumes that we have, it's so easy to assume that everything was easy, but it definitely wasn't. And
Nope.
And I think that does inform our leadership. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, I was saying that you have hosted many thought leaders and people who are change makers. And as we record this, you're fresh off doing one of those. Tell us a little bit about that one and how that came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just hosted in Toronto, former President Barack Obama. And so this was actually the launch of our new Future of Work series. So we're calling it the Future of Work and New Economy. It's a 4-part series that we're launching in Canada under our new Global Institute for Conscious Economics banner. And what we were bringing President Obama to Canada for was to have an intergenerational conversation around the economy, around where we're going as leaders, and to really get his opinion and insight on what we call conscious economics. And so it was a fascinating conversation. The model which we put together was a 1-for-1 ratio, which meant that for every single business leader or political leader that purchased a ticket or a table, another equivalent amount of tickets would be gifted to young leaders 30 and under. And we wanted it to be 30 and under because we wanted to capture those who have not yet entered the workforce and those who are currently in the workforce in the earlier segment of their career. And so what we did is have this fascinating intergenerational mixed conversation. We had young people at tables with C-level executives. We had kids from communities that wouldn't normally have access coming in. And we really had a deep and meaningful conversation about a whole range of topics that fall under what we call the new economy. So really trying to ask ourselves, where are we going? Not only as a country, but as a globe. How are we going to handle, the changes that are already impacting our systems? How are we going to handle that as leaders, as young people, as people who are currently in the workforce? So it was a fascinating conversation, and I think it really dovetails into the work that we are doing right now in many other areas. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you both. There's 2 pieces in there. One is, first of all, I want to ask you, you said you invited 1-for-1 young leaders who wouldn't necessarily, what was the qualification? How did somebody end up in that room who was, quote, a young leader?
Yeah. So a couple of ways. So first of all, there was no special qualification. I didn't want to, or we didn't want to have any restriction. So we had it a complete open lottery system where people could apply, either seeing it online on social media and apply directly. We also went out to community leaders. So before the event went public, we actually were sitting with Jean Augustine, who is an incredible Black leader in this country. She was the first Black senator in Canada. And we sat with Jean Augustine at her Center for Young Women and Girls with about 100 other community leaders. And we actually announced it there first that we were bringing President Obama in, and we specifically gave community leaders blocks of tickets so that they could determine the people that they wanted to see in that room, because we don't expect and assume that we know everything or we understand, who is in the trenches, who is doing that work. So we really engaged with different groups, the school boards, universities, and different community leaders across the country. We even had youth being flown in from the Northwest Territories, Indigenous youth from a bunch of different communities, including Six Nations. And so it was really, really a special act of community to come together. And this is a microcosm for the work that we are doing. So with this modeling, we are actually putting conscious economics to use. We are using a profitable model in order to extend opportunities for people who don't have that, opportunity yet. And so it's a really interesting business plan, really.
That's fabulous. And the second question I wanted to ask you was, I've had many futurists on the show here. We've spoken to many future thinking leaders, technology people, everybody from Stephen Kotler and The Future is Faster Than You Think and to Jared Nichols. I mean, many great futurists. And we talk a lot about the future of work, and I realize that that's what this series is. So for either or both of you, was there anything that you found that, for instance, Obama, because he was the one who you just did, showed you about the future of the workforce, of working, of where we're going, that was of a surprise that you would maybe not have considered?
I would say that, and I think Obama has classically been a leader that's shown us that authenticity is the pathway forward. And he did it again. He really did. He has a way about him. Yes, he's a politician, but he has a way of bringing people together and influencing conversation with just that personal touch. And so he really displayed that again. And it was something I hoped would come forward, because I want, C-level executives in Canada. It doesn't matter if you're running a bank. It doesn't matter if you're running a staunch button-down organization. We need to see more humanness in our leadership. And so I think that was definitely a piece. A big focus of the conversation, which I think surprised some in the audience, although I don't know why, was we were really talking about climate when we were talking about future of work and the transition of our labor force to deal with what is happening to our planet, and the interconnection between mental health and well-being and climate, and those two things intersecting. So I think for some people, it might have been a bit outside of the scope of what they were expecting. I think when people think future of work, I think a lot of people right now are thinking about very tangible, tactable labor market fluctuations and demographic fluctuations and technology. Yeah, and they're thinking about upskilling, and they're thinking a lot about technology, but we're really thinking about human technology. We're thinking about art, creativity, compassion, mental well-being, connectivity with planet. And so again, it's not what everyone's expecting, but really we feel that this is the way forward. And maybe you can kind of speak to those 4 pillars.
Yeah. How, I guess the crux of what we're talking about from our perspective of the future of work is that we have to acknowledge that we're in a mental health crisis. I mean, fundamentally, we have 500,000 Canadians that are calling into work sick every week due to mental health issues. That's $20 billion to the Canadian economy, and $6 billion is shouldered by corporations through a lack of productivity. I mean, people are showing up to work when they shouldn't be. And so our people are in crisis and our planet is in crisis. So those are two fundamental conversations that people aren't having. The future labor force doesn't, for the most part, really want to be involved in it. They're breaking before they're entering. And so we're looking at, okay, that's an important part of our conversation that we need to have. And we're looking at these 3 pillars of balancing people, planet, and profit as the foundation of the new economy. So what we're suggesting is, using the tools of entrepreneurship when you're constantly trying to come up with a problem solution match and you're pivoting on that process. And if something doesn't work, you just fail that idea using the tools of entrepreneurship and you move on to the next one. So at this point where we are in this state of crisis is that, if we're doing something that's harming either people and the planet, then we have to think critically about that and try to come up with a better way where it's balanced. And through iteration, if that doesn't work, then we fail the idea. It's okay. Move on to something that isn't harming us and the planet, because literally we're at a breaking point. So that's the conversation that we're pushing forward. And, you know, afterwards, we look at it and have conversations with people that were at this event, you're going to have a lot of people that are on board because they can already see that and they already
Yes.
realize that and they're resonating with it. And then you have another group of people that are sitting back and saying, I, you know, many ways don't understand this, probably in a state of cognitive dissonance. So they're trying to push away from it.
Sure.
So if there's that tension there, and it's often coming from corporate hierarchy, then we know that we're doing the right thing. And we're having the right conversation and we're going down the right path. So we have those three pillars that we're looking at balancing. And the other part of it is we're really focusing on the intersection between art and business. And we see that that is something that some people are talking about right now. And if they're not talking about it right now, they will be talking about it in about 5 or 10 years, about how important it is that the innovation that's coming out of the art community and how much that can be used and harnessed and developed within a business context. And
let's just talk a little bit more about that, art and business, because at a general level, those are not seen as the same thing, unless you're a business person with a lot of money who gets a chance to buy an Andy Warhol, you know, as an investment. That's really the only context for art and business / investment. So talk to us a little bit more about the future of work and how art and business go together.
So I think one of the ways that we have really been studying this is looking at automation, looking at the age of the machine and this fourth industrial revolution, and really kind of trying to distill down what are the key skills that we need as executives, as leaders, as, you know, young people that we're trying to train. What kind of skills do we need in order to optimize performance in this new economy? And it really comes down to the machines are getting better and better at doing the jobs that they do. And
Absolutely.
this is actually causing a great amount of fear amongst people as we see full industries shifting because machine can do a better job at remedial tasks or, you know, analyzing large data sets than the human mind can. But one thing that the machine cannot do is, you know, really has to do with human creativity, human creation, emotional intelligence. So we know that when we look at the art sector right now, so the creative sector, we can see that there's been people for a long time that have been working in a different way. They don't go into a 9-to-5 job to create. People that are creators know that you can't mandate creativity. You have to give it space in order to grow, in order to flourish. It usually comes from life experience and having tangible touch points with real life, relationships, people, planet, going around, travel. And so what we're saying is, if we need to infuse our labor force with a new set of skills, if we want to really optimize innovation, creativity in a business sense, then can we learn something from the way that artists have been conducting themselves? Can we learn something from the creative economy? On a more tangible side in Canada, we are at a real crossroads as an economy in Canada. Our backbone of our economic infrastructure in this country has always been rooted in our natural resources.
Right.
And so now we know that we're having a very tense conversation across this country right now about where we're going and how we're moving forward as a nation and as an economy. Are we going to keep investing in fossil fuels and the creation of, you know, carbon emitting energy producing technology, or are we going to be shifting? And one of the things that I think we fail to recognize is how incredible the creative economy here is in Canada, how many stories there are to tell, how much intersection there is with our diversity. I just think of even our Indigenous peoples and all of the incredible things that we have to harness. So what we're saying is, can we open up the minds of a banker or a business leader to say, is there more we can lend from, you know, into the actual core business community from these artistic endeavors? And it comes down to even the way we curate our shows. So we're doing a future of work show with President Obama as the key speaker, and the whole room was infused with art. We had performances, spoken words, singers, because we actually want to change the vibration of people in the room so that they're actually taking in information in a different way. When we implore all of our different senses, soon as you get chills down your back from hearing an incredible piece of music, you are open in a different way to receive something. And so if we open people up with music and creativity and then have a really great, hard economic conversation, we know that we're actually hitting people at a different point. There's a neuroscience aspect to what we're doing. So that's in a nutshell how we see that convergence happening. And we're going to keep pushing that and keep, doing really interesting cross collaboration projects with people who are in different sectors right now and bringing them into business.
I love that, because one of the things about memory that people don't understand is there's a whole science around memory that most people are, even actually many psychologists don't understand, is that memory is directly linked to emotion on a spectrum. So up to 12 o'clock, the spectrum is the emotion. The level of emotion is accelerating to 12 o'clock, and the more powerful that emotion is, the deeper the memory of it. And on the other side of that spectrum is trauma. So from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock is levels of trauma where the emotion becomes compartmentalized along with the memory. And what's fascinating about it, what you're talking about, is creating an environment that is from 9 o'clock to the top of the clock, to noon, where people are being able to have an emotionally connected experience and learn in the same environment. And so my wife and I had a seminar company, public seminar company, and every 45 minutes there was a break for music, dancing, moving, saying something that would get somebody emotionally connected, because that's how we learn, that's how we integrate. And I love that you're doing that in a room with a bunch of button-down bankers and Obama. This is going to be very civilized. We're having the president come. We'll all be very nice, and we'll all sit there with a stick up our bum, and we won't move. Well, actually, you will. We're going to have some music, and we're going to have some, And I just love that you're doing that, because I think it's awakening things that are different. And one of the things that you're drawing a parallel with is the parallel between the modern challenges we face and the consequences of being unconscious. And so I think that's a dangerous term, because it is a jargon word. Unconscious, conscious, you and I, all the three of us have had conversations about this in the past. We understand what it means, but I think there's a lot of people who genuinely believe they know what it means, but it means something different to everybody. So tell us what it means to you guys when you're talking about having this conscious capitalism and exploring the parallels between the modern challenges we face and the consequences of being quote unquote unconscious.
Yeah, in many ways, we look at this as that, you were mentioning it earlier around the blind spot piece, is that when people are functioning in an unconscious way, and even for those that are, as we say, that are conscious, we're blind to things, we're asleep to certain things. So when people are functioning in a way that is unconscious, in many ways, it's autopilot. You're just functioning through your day on autopilot and not thinking very critically or being self-aware or analyzing or taking a moment to reflect in and saying, how am I doing? Am I okay? Or am I escaping from something that isn't working particularly well in my life? It's if I don't like my job, I'm not happy in my relationships, or any myriad of different things that are causing people to be driven towards escapism, consumption, in all various different forms. So that level of unconsciousness causes us to behave in a certain way in our society that results in the imbalance of people, planet, and profit, where people are poisoning themselves, other people, and the planet. So functioning in that way through blind spots to the point where they don't actually see it or appreciate what they're doing, because in many ways they're oblivious to it. And there's a quote that is out there by a critical theorist from the 1950s, and he says something along the lines of the fact that, you know, just because millions and millions of people function in a certain way doesn't mean that's normal, and it doesn't make those people sane. So it's being able to be aware of, you know, how you're going about your day-to-day activities. Just because everybody else is doing it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it okay.
Yeah, well, as Bradshaw said, normal isn't healthy. Normal is just whatever you got used to. Right, and you know, you were talking about the epidemic of mental health, and for me, because of my background in psychology, one of the things that's very clear to me is something you just brought up, which is escapism. I mean, the bottom line is we can be very critical of it, we can be very judgmental of it, we can say it's unconscious or whatever it is, but the bottom line is everybody, and I mean everybody, you, me, us, the world, is trying to feel better, right? Now, what does that mean? I don't know, because it's subjective, but it means that you've got a level and you go, I want to feel better than this. Okay, cool. So what are you doing to feel better? And we live in a world that tells us this will make you feel better. Buy this, have that. This will make you feel better. Get your boobs done. Get your hair done. Get more muscle. Get less fat. Get binge watch this show. Binge watch that show. All these are going to make you feel better, and they're all ways to consume. And consumerism, and people also misunderstand that. Consumerism isn't just what you buy; it's what you consume. Yeah. So if you're consuming the Kardashians, then you're consuming something that is impacting the way you are. And we used to say, you are what you eat. And I would say, rather, and they do say, even from the stage, you are what you consume. Not what you eat, what you consume. So if you're consuming nonsense, reality TV all day long, well, you know, if you like it, that's fine. But if you're consuming it all day long, you're trying to feel better. I get that. I understand that, respect that. But is that having a direct negative impact on you, on your consciousness, on your heart and your soul and the connection to those things, and on those that you love and wish to impact? And so I really love that you're bringing that awareness to this, because a lot of the flow of capitalism has been around feeding this escapism. And we live in a world more of that than ever.
I think one of the most interesting things, and again, I am the CEO and president of the Economic Club of Canada, and for the last decade I've led that organization and, you know, hosted over 100 events each year with business leaders. So I really do feel like I have a good sense of what's on the minds of business leaders across this country.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that always takes me back is we are sitting around tables trying to figure out solutions to problems that are entrenched in the very system that we're running. Yet nobody wants to look at that. So again, we have a bunch of business leaders and policymakers sitting around saying, how are we going to figure out climate change? How are we going to sit around, or how are we going to legislate and put policy around climate change? Do we tax more? Do we do this? And really the whole mechanism of our economic system right now is destroying the planet. And it's not just about, you know, the cars we drive. It's absolutely the way we consume. It's even the media we consume. It's the clothes that we wear. It's the food that we eat. And it's this incessant desire to fill what is a hole inside so many of us that we are over consuming and calling that success. The more stuff that I have, the better off I am, the more I'm admired in this system. And so what's really interesting to me is the folks that say, I'm fine, everything's fine, I'm exempt from this mental health crisis that you speak of. I'm doing great. I've got my 2 cars, I've got my beautiful spouse, I've got the kids, we're going on the vacations, we're doing the things. I would ask that, same individual that feels exempt from it to, what human being is okay with the planet and half the people in it not having that same experience? Are you really that well? How well are you if you can continue to conduct your life in a way that, yes, maybe you aren't feeling directly impacted, but by your choices and decisions, you're upholding a system that has half the world starving? I mean, that's the unconsciousness. That's
Mhm.
the part where we don't realize the interconnection to each other. And consciousness to me is just awareness. Another word to say it is awareness. So
Mhm.
how aware are we? And there's always levels and levels of awareness. So I'm at a certain level of consciousness right now as an individual, and I am yet to be at yet another level of consciousness. I can continue to grow and expand that awareness throughout my life and my experiences.
And I think that's a very good, and I use that same example, very good way to understand it is consciousness is nothing more than a level of awareness, and the levels of awareness are infinite.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's constantly expanding. And the way that I refer to it is truth with a small or a capital T.
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly exploring truth, understanding that the truth I understand is a small t
Mm-hmm.
versus a large T truth. And I'm exploring to the next level of truth, because there was a time when it was true that the sun revolved around the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became true that it wasn't that way. And so oftentimes the thing I'll put forward to people to have them think is, what is the lie you hold as the truth? And they go, well, I don't know that I do. And I go, okay, that's cool. Now look back into your life and say, what is the lie you held as a truth back then? And they go, I don't think I did. And I go, okay, did you ever believe in Santa Claus?
Mm-hmm.
And they go, yeah. And I go, okay, that was a lie you believed as a truth.
Right.
Where might you still be doing that? What's the Santa Claus today?
Mm-hmm.
Is the Santa Claus that this climate stuff is made up? Okay. Is the Santa Claus that the climate stuff is real? I don't know. But you have got to be willing to explore those kinds of things. And we all like to live in the blinded world of saying, okay, well, I'm fine. We're fine. The people I love are fine. And I don't want to think about the people in Somalia. And I don't want to think about the people in some little village in Southeast Asia or in Africa, or the people who are mining lithium for batteries so we can have modern electric cars, and it's child slave labor.
Mm-hmm.
That the production lines of most of the Western world are made up of slave labor, and people are like, what? They don't have an awareness of that. Okay, I'm not saying you have to do anything, but you can be aware, and then you can make a choice, because there's no power without choice.
Right.
So I love that you're bringing that to people.
Yeah, and I think that also when we look at, awareness or consciousness at an individual level, that is also at a macro level, a societal level as
Mm-hmm.
well. And when we look at, collective conversations that we're having, and Rhiannon was just mentioning this, is that, with the finger on the pulse of corporate leadership across Canada and looking at how do we address these societal problems, and the lens that is always looked through at these problems is using the existing systems that we have in place. And I feel that if we're going to go up to, you say, as the infinite levels of consciousness, there's plateaus that we all hit as individuals and as a society. And I feel that right now we're at a a plateau where we're looking at trying to solve these problems using a broken system that foundationally isn't working. And this is where entrepreneurship is so important, using tools like design thinking, where you can look at and say, this problem needs to be looked at in a completely different way, and we need to throw the systems out for a second and try to understand, how do we solve this problem? And working with leaders under the age of 30, it's that fundamentally we have a problem in our society around climate, in that the people that are going to be inheriting the earth don't have a say on how it's treated. And we have young people that have no political voice in our society, and that's a problem. And we look back 100 years ago, there was a lot of people that didn't have a say, and now we're seeing young people taking to the streets. And is
Mm-hmm.
this one of those points in time where we look back 20 years, 50 years and say, how could we have done that? How could we have treated these people in this way? How have we, used ageism to infringe upon their human rights? And I think this is the conversation that we need to have, because our political framework has not really been innovated in 1,000 years.
Well, I fully agree with what you're saying, and I think to bring that to the point, as Einstein said, you can't fix a problem with the same mindset with which you created it. Okay, and that's exactly what you're talking about. We're trying to fix a problem inside a system that is dysfunctional by its very nature. I get that, and at the same time, like you guys, I am dealing with very high level leaders in the corporate world who are of a limit, and we're all of a limited time frame, that we're going to be in our position until we're not, and then we're going to be dead and somebody else is going to inherit it. But it is the nature of human beings to exist in survival, and in that existence of survival we go, yeah, it's fine, it's okay, and I don't have to worry about it. I mean, I know that I was working with a company, with the president of the company, who was in his late 60s, who said, we don't really need purpose. The company has worked great. We don't need to start looking at this. It's worked great. It's, you can't argue with the results was what he said. And I said, yeah, you actually can argue with the results, because the results are formed in the context of what you understood at the time. You can't argue with the result of that. That's a beautiful mink coat, until you get to a place where you go, oh my God, what's happening to these animals? And you go, that's terrible. And you change your mind. Okay. So at the same time, they're still saying, but this works. And the problem is, things work until they don't. We don't often deal with things until they are subjectively real for us. It's like the Republican, I can't remember who it was, the Republican congressman who was very anti-gay and all those things, and was, wanting to shut things down, and then realized, his son came out as gay, and he said, I've changed my thinking. Well, of course you have. It's real for you now. Mm-hmm. And I think that when Jeff, when you talk about things like climate or even global economics, it's not real for that person at that time. If you're living in Toronto or New York or London or Sydney or LA, it's not real for you, because you're not living in the Maldives and watching your country disappear under the ocean. Mm-hmm. So help us to understand that, help our leaders to grasp that.
First of all, I think that we have to really study, the psychology and the neuroscience of the way that we as human beings act and interact and think. So none of us every day can wrap our minds around the global issues around the world and then connect back and feel personally responsible for them. Like, we all will shut that off at some level and point. Yeah. And I don't want to pretend that I don't either. I don't want to sit here and pretend like that's not something that I do. So what we're, I think, trying to drive and what we're doing with this work of conscious economics is we're saying that rather than trying to find 10 million rules and legislative and policy solutions to these issues, the issue is solved at the individual level. If the individual can go within, if the individual can unblock the programming that's making them make certain choices around food and the way they live and the way they spend and the way they escape, then we can, as a mass, each be responsible for one thing ourselves, and we can start to actually influence a greater collective change, which I think is really interesting. It feels much more manageable if we think about it that way. One of the things that I implore our business leaders and our political leaders here in Canada to think about, yes, we may be here, comfortable in Toronto and not be experiencing the deep effects of climate right now. But when we look to different jurisdictions around the world who are having to migrate and flee, we have to understand that as these things continue to bubble up over the next 10 years, where are people going to go? And is Canada going to be a place that a mass amount of people are going to come to seek refuge in? And where do we stand politically? I know where we stand right now on, 100,000 or 200,000, but where do we stand if there's 3 million or 4 million people that are being displaced that need to come here to a vast landmass that we have with tons of fresh water and tons of resources. Where do we stand? And I don't think we're asking ourselves those questions. We're always, reacting to something that's happening as opposed to the long-term planning that needs to really be thought out. The science is there. It cannot be ignored. And so it's, whether you're being directly impacted or not, the infrastructure to which exists right now in this country will change, regardless of whether it's because the climate change happens here at the rate, or it's happening somewhere around the world where places are becoming unlivable, where people are having wars over water. I mean, this is really, truly where we are going. So I think that there needs to be more depth to thinking. Now, the one other thing that I want to just jump in on, because any listener who's listening to this right now, I can already sense and feel someone going, okay, here it is. This is the whole kumbaya, it's all, planet profit. Let's think about the starving children. No, I've got work to do. We have a business to run. Like, we can't, this isn't the style of the way that we want to think about these issues. And what Jeff and I are talking and where our theory is really rooted is not in throwing away the entire system. It's alchemizing what we already have in order to actually work for the new economy, for the new set of challenges. The infrastructure even that we have in our energy sector, for me, is valuable. It's a valuable infrastructure. It is not something to be, tossed off to the wind. It's how do we use that infrastructure? How do we mobilize those mass workforces, our manufacturing sector and everything else, for a new industry, which is global cleanup? How do we take mass amounts of people with great skill sets in manufacturing and in, engineering and in energy, and be able to actually turn that into something that can work for the planet and work for the circumstances that we face right now? This is some of the work that we're doing, and profit is absolutely a part of our model. There's nothing wrong with profit. And that is where I think so much of the left and right get polarized around these conversations, is we make it political, we make it about charity or money or wealth accumulation or not. And really it's none of those. It's really something that lives in the center of those things that we're really talking about.
Yeah, and the problem with it too is these conversations that we have is that a lot of these terms are jargon, they're loaded, and they have people have in their mind is that they're hearing something and it might sound new to them, and they're like, okay, communism. And then they just go into their mind about things like that. And it's just, I'm a capitalist. I could, I stand, or sit before you and your listeners, and I say, the answer isn't more government. The answer isn't more regulation. It's not taxing and taking more profit away. It's like, as an entrepreneur, looking at this, these issues from the lens of entrepreneurship, is throw entrepreneurs at these problems, and they will solve it much more effectively than bureaucrats, politicians, or people that have these 2 to 5 year time frame lenses.
Yeah, in which they have to raise funds to stay in place. So I this is one of the things I was really intrigued by what you guys are doing, which is this idea that the global crises, and I put that in the plural because whether it's climate, or economics, or mental health, or whatever it might be, I love the fact that you guys are approaching this from a place of this can be solved by entrepreneurs as opposed to by legislation. And I think that so often on the left, we're looking at it to be solved by legislation, and on the right, we're looking at it being solved by ripping the legislation away. And really what's clear is, and I love that you're saying that, is this, it really is a matter of creative thinking in the context of innovation through entrepreneurship. And I just love that. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. So what I want to ask you is, as the Global Institute of Conscious Economics, as your future of work process that you're doing, your book that you're about to offer, when you look at all those things, how is Canada doing? Because you're Canadian based, and a lot of our listeners are around the world. We're in over 100 countries, but we also have a very large listenership in the United States. How is Canada doing compared to other countries in embracing what it is you're talking about, in shifting this consciousness?
Mhm. It's a tough question to answer because
Hmm.
it depends on really who you ask and who you're talking about. I would say that we're not nearly where we need to be in
Right.
Canada, especially with the amount of wealth that we have here, the good solid infrastructure and government and all the resources that we have available to us here in
Hmm.
Canada.
Right.
There is a deep risk aversion in Canada amongst our corporate leaders. And you can see evidence of this by even take the challenge that we are going through as a nation right now around energy. It
Hmm.
really is polarizing. And if you even look at the news this week with the, arrest of the RCMP of Indigenous peoples, and there's protests all across the country right now about another pipeline, and there's traction and standstill from political leaders and government leaders. Anyone who's outside of the sector won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. You will not hear any C-level executive from another sector coming and taking a really active stance about what we should do as a country. And that lack of unified voice from our private sector really, really is unfortunate, because again, where we see an opportunity is we see business as a vehicle for change. We see profitable business with social motivation as the vehicle. And we cannot get there if we have leadership that is so risk adverse to even come out with a 2-line statement without having it go through 50 other people, where the whole message is just gone. And I understand that right now, everything is sort of wrapped around, the shareholder and the public perception of organizations, especially publicly traded. And so we're in this real crossroads where people feel locked, that they can't even speak. And
Hmm.
so we are not going to get anywhere we need to go with this kind of collective,
Lack of authenticity.
is really the truth. And so I think that we have a long way to go as Canadians, but I also deeply believe in the value of this country. I'm a proud Canadian, and I think that Canada can be the model, and create the model that then can be replicated around the world. I believe we have everything here, including the labor force, including the talent, the science, the entrepreneurship, and just actually the environmental component of it. Our landmass is being so underutilized right now. We were talking to a colleague of ours and imagining this idea of the shared work thing that's just blowing up around the world, this idea of plugging in and working anywhere you want in the world in
Yep.
these shared workspaces. And we were like, why is there not a shared workspace in the middle of northern Ontario where I can live out in the bush and I can plug in on my laptop and I can do my work? Like, why are we not using the vast mass of land here in favor, with something that is more balanced and more connected to nature and well-being and all of those things?
No, because artists do that all the time. It's somebody that's going to go and write an album or do something artistic. They often have to go away. They're traveling, they're in the bush, they're in a cabin or whatever. And it's, we're in corporate towers in a major city center and sitting around fluorescent lights.
Yeah.
Take a break. 1 hour, be creative.
Yeah, it's a fascinating nonsense that we run. We're demanding that from everybody, and everybody I know who is a creative, everybody I know who is a creative. I mean, I'm by nature I'm an artist, but even when I go away to write, I go away to write.
Yes.
And so what? And so I ask people all the time, well, what am I going away from? And the answer is distraction. Now, can I find distraction even when I go away? Of course I can. With my computer, I can connect and I can find distraction, but I can also find grounding, and I can find breath, and I can find that moment of going, okay, I might go click on Facebook, or I could go and just stand outside in a moment for a moment and just look at the nature and then come back in and use that as the break. And I think that a lot of times we use Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever it might be as a way to take a break. But it's not a break. It's what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to click the brain into a different mode, but it's not a break, and it becomes another level of stimulus. So I love that what you're saying there is about this idea of giving people the space to create whatever that is for them. And as we become more and more urban, I mean, certainly the millennial generation have become more urban, but there's going to be, this is always a flux. There's always one way, then there's the other way. And so we'll become very urban, then we won't. And I think, as you say, with the potential shifting of populations moving from one place to another, we will have to open that up. We'll have to make that possible. It's a fascinating, fascinating conversation. And I'm really grateful to you guys for not only for being here and having the conversation, but for all that you do in the work that you're doing. Before we finish, and before I ask you to tell our listeners and our viewers where they can find out more about the Global Institute for Conscious Economics and all the things that you're doing, the potential of where you're going, I'd love to, if you could both individually, I really always love to have my guests share with our audience something that is practical for them, something that will bring this home for them that they could do preferably in the next 24 hours to make it real.
Yeah, I mean, my piece of advice would be to give yourself some time, not distracted by phones or music or anything, but just sit in quiet, sit in silence and be with yourself at least even 15 minutes a day. You will be surprised at what comes forward of the chatter that happens with your mind at first, which is absolutely uncontrollable for all of us. But even just sitting with that and watching how much chatter your mind is actually, producing, and just having that, few minutes a day where you start to reconnect with you. This is really how I started. It was, 3 minutes a day on an app on my phone where I was trying to teach myself how to meditate. And meditation for me and just being in quiet is where I connect into these deeper questions that I'm asking myself that influence now the way that I operate, lead, and work.
Thank you.
And for me, it's that if that meditation part doesn't speak to individuals or they're not drawn to do something like that, I just say, go take a walk, preferably in nature, take the dog or whatever, go for a half an hour, go for an hour, and don't put anything in your ears, don't look at anything on your phone, and just walk. And whatever comes into your mind, understand it, appreciate it, see what it is, and let it go. And if you can't do that, you can't go for a walk in nature, and if you have to commute to work or something to that effect, turn the radio off in the car.
Right.
Don't have anything on. Or if you're on the train or whatever, just sit with your thoughts. And, sometimes, at least for me, before I started getting into it, is I found that I didn't do that. And I think a lot of people don't do that. And it's really healthy for them, at least for their mental health, to just take a moment and check in with themselves.
It's interesting in both what both of you said, because I think we are a society that fears the silence. Mm-hmm. We fear the silence, and because in the silence we will hear the noise in our head. Mm-hmm. That's why we fear the silence, is we fear the noise in our head. So how do I drown out the noise in my head? Well, I put earbuds in, or I look at my screen or whatever it might be. And to, as you both said, just to, again, consciousness is nothing more than awareness. Mm-hmm. So becoming aware of even that noise in your own head, and what is the biases of the noise in your head that may not be your highest truth. In your work with your organization, etc., what would you both say is the central message that you want people to get from the Global Institute of Conscious Economics, of the future of work, of the things that you're doing? What is the central message you want to have us get?
We are trying to build a platform to talk about the new economy. The new economy has 4 pillars for us. That is people, planet, profit, and art, and those things working in harmony and those things converging together. So very simply put, and anything that you see our organization do or put out, The model that we operate our own business is a microcosm for what the new system is that we're trying to push out. So we are, practicing what we preach. We're using our profits and our dollars to add value to community. We're engaging with people outside of the normal spectrum and industries that you would normally find oneself working with. And we're challenging ourselves every day, challenging our own consciousness, challenging our own thought patterns. I constantly am finding myself in places where I've got a very myopic view of a particular thing, or I'm triggered by something, and I have to go in and look at what the root of that is. This is a constant journey for all of us. We are machines that have been operating on autopilot as a collective for a very, very long time. So it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, and ultimately, if we want to just simplify what we're focusing on, it's just, trying to help people to be more self-aware, or creating opportunities for that, creating a platform for that, because we feel that if we're going to get out of the crises that we're in, it starts with the individual and their self-awareness. And if people can take the opportunity and the time to become more self-aware, then we're already walking down the path that we need to go.
Wonderful. Like I said, I love what you guys are doing. I think it's very important. It's vitally needed today more than anywhere. And I love, and I want to just reiterate this to our listeners, to our viewers. This is not some woo kumbaya idea that we're throwing at economics. You guys are really looking at the economics is important, it's viable, and we should be using entrepreneurship, we should be using capitalism, but in a very positive way. This is not about some high level socialist, communist idea, Marxist idea at all, but really about using economics for good. And I love that you're doing that. And I think it's really important for all of us to understand that it's not either or, it's both, that there is a higher level evolution here, and that you guys are really burning the path forward, that you are being dragons on that path and burning that away. And I just love that you are igniting that fire in others. So thank you both so much. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you for all that you're doing. And please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all the wonderful resources that you're offering.
Absolutely. You can check out our website, consciouseconomics.ca. You can also look at the economicclub.ca if you want to get pointed to conscious economics work. And Jeff and I both can be followed on Instagram and social media. I'm Rhiannon Rosalind. He's Dr. Jeff Overall. Jeffrey Overall. Sorry. I've forgotten his Instagram handle. But yes, and we're very active on those platforms, and I'm always pushing out some of the work and happy to engage with anyone who wants to reach out. You can absolutely send us an email. Both our email addresses are on the website, and we'd love to chat with you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, of course, we will post all of that information in the show notes, so those will be available to everybody. But again, we really appreciate both of you being here. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you, dear listener, where you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes by going to our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Simply go to Leadership and Loyalty Podcast on either of those platforms. And when you're ready for to develop your leadership and loyalty in your organization, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com. And to find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or strategist for your organization, simply go to fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. Full Monty Leadership, we're dedicated to giving you the skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you cannot outsource authenticity. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how we can use economics to raise consciousness, and how we can use consciousness, which is awareness, to raise economics. Till next time, I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into your deep greatness to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.